Hey everyone! Today I want to share with you my favorite books of 2020 and I'm really excited about this. It's been quite a year and I think that for us as readers, this year has probably affected everyone in different ways, like whether you read a lot less or read a lot more. When I look back on my year of reading, the word that comes to mind for me is disjointed. Like, I started off this year in such a slump. Like, I had been in a reading slump for about 6 months and really pulled myself out of it around like March, and then read really indulgently for a few months. Indulgently meaning just intuitively, just like whatever kind of came to mind I wanted to read, I reached for it. And then I started a Master's of Literature program. So then a whole bunch of my reading was chosen for me and not something I chose. So it's kind of interesting looking back on the year. I wouldn't say this has been my best reading year, but there are some really good books that I read that are favorites. Probably, I like there are one or two that definitely that's true for. But it's sort of a weird year of reading, and I think that kind of the way I'm going to talk about them in this book would also in this video is probably going to reflect that a little bit as well, because I don't know how to rank them. So I have 10 books that are my favorites and 6 that are honorable mentions. But actually, before we can go any further, I have to say these are not the best books I read of the year, which partially is because the required reading from my master's program throws that all off. So this is purely a favorites list, just the books that I enjoyed the reading experience of the most, but I also require of these books that they stick with me, like they have some sort of lasting impact, that they come back to my mind or really elicit a real emotional reaction when I think about them again, or a real like mentally stimulated reaction that makes me really think about the concepts of the book and it gets stuck in my head. So that's a major requirement for me. It would be hard for me to articulate everything that really makes something a favorite. But I'm going to talk about my 6 honorable mentions and then I'm going to get to my favorite list. So let's just start with that. Rough Magic, Writing the World's Loneliest Horse Race by Laura Pirro Palmer, and then also Mothers by Britt Bennett. I really enjoyed reading them. Like, the experience of reading them was wonderful and I was really drawn back to reading these books. But then I completely forget that I read them. They didn't really stick with me long term. The Refugees, also The Gathering by Anne Enright, and The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler. And these are all 3 books that I read for my master's program, and they are books that I can distinctly say, well, I did enjoy The Refugees pretty well, but overall they were books that I sort of had a mediocre experience reading, but then as I dug into them academically in a classroom setting, reading secondary sources and things, these books really came alive to me in a way that made me just think that they were utterly incredible. But I kind of can't disassociate from the fact that I didn't have like a really significant like reading experience with them. And then for kind of the same reason, and don't kill me for this, but I'm also putting Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy here as well. This is, hear me out, this is a huge book and I listened to it. I think back on the book as having been enjoyable to read, but it didn't stick with me because I very much recognize this, and I really, really think this is the case because of the way I consumed it. I listened to it and I did it while doing other projects by multitasking, and I really think that affected how much I engage with the book. Okay, so now for my favorites of the year. Okay, so I have 10 books and I have not put them into like ascending from least favorite to favorite order. I have sort of intuitively put them into an order that feels like it evolves. It sort of feels like it's put in a circular order. This is nonsense, I know, but intuitively in my brain, this is the order I have to talk about these books. And I'm sorry if that's super weird, but let's just jump into it, okay? Enough rambling. The favorites. So I'm going to start with the Parveen mystery series by Sujata Massey, which is 2 books, The Windows of Malabar Hill and The Satin Per Moonstone. Soaked them up. They were so enjoyable to read. Probably one of the most like plot heavy books that I enjoyed this year. They are mysteries about Parveen Mystery, that's her name, and these take place in 1920 Bombay, and she is a qualified lawyer from Oxford, but is not allowed to practice because of the laws of Bombay at the time. It is much more like crime solving than detective, but within this time period that has all these really interesting dynamics of like the use of the character's gender, the several religions that are talked about in both of these books, a lot of cultural history that was just really enlightening to me. And so I enjoyed this character, I enjoyed the experience of reading it, and I learned a lot about like the time period. This was this really, really enjoyable read. Both of these books, I liked both of them for different reasons. I don't think I could pick a favorite. These were both favorites of the year. Definitely just loved them. Then Winter by Ali Smith, and this was the book that pulled me out of a reading slump, and I loved it. Winter is part of her seasonal quartet, and which you've probably heard about. I feel like it's been pretty popular here on BookTube, and this is the second installment and is about like this family, a group of people that are stuck together for Christmas. But it's not really about that. It's more about how we sort of other people, how we fail to communicate, like generational gaps, things like that, those things are interesting to me, but also the way that she uses her form to explore this content, I think is done. It's very complimentary and it's done really, really well. And I think it hit just the areas of interest that worked for me, and because of that it broke open for me an interest in reading other books and authors that are experimenting with form, and I really appreciate it for that, the role that it played in my reading year because of that, getting me out of reading slump and introducing me more positively to literary experimentation, I suppose. And that feels like it leads into the next book that I want to mention that I really enjoyed, The Enlightenment of the Greengage Tree by Shakufeh Azar. It's a magical realism take on the Islamic Revolution in Iran. The book really uses magical realism to capture this shifting reality through this war of ideas that is happening at the time, and we follows a family who is all like really suffer from the war. What I loved about it was its the complementary content and form, and it was my introduction to magical realism as well. I'm pretty sure this is the first like magical realism book I ever read, and I really enjoyed that, and I really appreciated it introducing me to that, and I just thought it was really quite an excellent and very accomplished book, and it was informative to me in terms of learning about the revolution in Iran, a lot of the sort of shifting ideologies of that time. I just thought it was amazing. And I would really, really recommend this one. Following kind of in that vein, I also really loved this year The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan, and this is a multi-generational story about Chinese immigrants to the US. It's about 4 women and their relationships with their daughters, as well as them sort of remembering their relationships with their mothers. It's told in 16 short stories from 8 characters. So you have this multi-generational story playing out from multiple perspectives and sort of mirrored experiences, because all the mothers are born in China and immigrate to the US, and then all the daughters are born in the US. I also enjoyed, again, the complementary use of form, because the mothers in this book are part of a mahjong club, the Joy Luck Club. The way that the book is structured follows the order of play for that game. I just thought that was really, really excellent. I love complex female relationships. I love multi-generational stories. I love paradigm shifts, shifting forms of perceiving the world, which is really common in multi-generational immigrant stories, because you have such, the younger generation is being raised in a different culture than their parents were raised in. I find that really, really interesting. When I finished, I knew it was going to be one of my favorites of the year, and I think it has really proven to be. I really, just like talking about this, I want to go back and reread it again. So I really recommend this one for sure. Beloved by Toni Morrison is the next on my list, which was a required book for my master's degree. It is an American classic, but particularly speaks to the Black community and the Black experience in the United States. It was written in it won the Nobel Prize in 1993. What this is about, Setha, who is living in the transition, we have both her living in as an enslaved woman before the Civil War, and then also life after the Civil War. And this book is about her and her daughter being haunted by the ghost of beloved, and about I don't know how to explain this book without giving it away, but it's a really incredible tale about that emotionally captures the trauma of slavery for the Black community, in particular reference to family. And this book really captures the fact that it is an element of our past that will haunt us until we recognize it and we address it and we heal from it. Again, I don't feel like I know how to explain this book without sort of giving it away, but it is a really harrowing book. It is one of the most technically accomplished literary works that I have ever read. I can definitely say that. The author is I feel like every element of this book, every choice of words in this book is very intentional, and it's very symbolic. There's a lot of metaphor. There's a lot of ways that the form of this book in a circular narrative creates a really immersive experience for the reader that sort of draws you into that circle of trauma, that circle of compounding memories and compounding trauma, and how oral narrative arises when a community is robbed of their history and robbed of elements of their identity. I think this book is an incredible book, and it should be read just because of that, but it should also be read because of how powerful it is at capturing the emotional trauma of post-slavery America. Gosh, this is a really, really good one. If you haven't read this one, I would recommend it. I also talked about this book in my last video where I talked about my Master's of Literature, the books I'm reading for my master's degree. And I would recommend watching that because I talk a little bit more about how I think you should approach this book as a reader. I want to move on to another very emotionally impactful read that I had this year, which was Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. This book, I thought it was beautiful. It's the story of Hamnet, who is the son of Shakespeare, but it's very much not about Shakespeare or from his perspective. This story is about Hamnet getting sick, and it's from his perspective and from that of his mother, Agnes, or also known as Anne Hathaway. And this book, gosh, I didn't expect to love it as much as I did. The emotion in this book and how beautifully it was written just took my breath away. I feel like I became so emotionally invested in this book, and I was so drawn back to reading it. I think it has incredible atmosphere. I think the writing, the author is just so accomplished in her use of words, how beautiful it felt to read this book. I really, really liked it. I think she was incredible at creating setting and atmosphere and making her characters feel really, really real and vulnerable. This book, I also found really nostalgic, and I loved the fact it just felt so immersive. I just felt like I was in this time period and so emotionally invested in the whole story. I thought it was really, really excellent. If you have been tempted by this book and all of the raving reviews it's gotten, I think you should give it a go, because I thought it was really excellent. One of my favorites from this year. And reading Hamnet put me in the mood for Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I read these back to back, and Pride and Prejudice has to be on this list as well. This wasn't my first time reading this book, but I feel that there was so much that I got out of it this second read. I think some of the things I took away from it this time was how subtle and yet impactful the economic and social dynamic inside the book, how important that is to the story, and yet how much I think I've always underestimated it. It feels so tangible, the fact that for so many women in the book, for all the women in the book, their marriage is so tied up in economics, in their socioeconomic opportunity, and how the social dynamics of Darcy and Elizabeth plays out is really, really important to the plot of the book as well. And I don't think I've ever appreciated that before. Maybe that's just so dumb of me, but I think I just loved this cute love story. And yet this time around, I appreciated how the tension in the book was crafted with these real world dilemmas and tension, you know? There were a lot of details about this book I appreciated reading it this time. It's a great classic. It's so good, so good. So feeding off of the social dynamic and the socioeconomic components of Pride and Prejudice actually leads me right into Exciting Times by Naoise Dolan and the reasons why I loved this book. Sorry, that light is really annoying, but I don't know what to do about that. There we go. This book is about this is an Irish author, and it's about an Irish girl who is teaching English in Hong Kong and finds herself basically in a love triangle. A lot of people speak to the sort of millennial fiction components of this book, and I think that's true, but what I loved about it was the socioeconomic commentary and the obsessive and compulsive socioeconomic analysis of her environment, the character, the way that she was really, really concerned with analyzing people by their class and socioeconomic position. It feels like such a weird thing to have taken away from this book, but I loved her commentary. I felt like the author did such a great job of giving the main character, Ava, this voice, and it's really an internal monologue voice, an internal narrative voice that is very sharp and observant and also really, really witty. And this was a required reading for my class, and I have to give my professor credit because he was the one that said this, that he thought this voice is the closest thing that could be considered to a modern day Jane Austen in her wit and observation of social behavior. And I find that fascinating, and I completely agree with it. I don't think this book would necessarily be for everybody. The plot is a little bit slow and things like that, but it's all about the dialogue. It's all about these observations, these little, I don't even have the right terms for them off the top of my head, but I thought this was really such an interesting and engaging book. I really liked this one. The last book that I have to talk about this year was the most thought-provoking. If I had to choose a favorite, the book that has probably stuck with me the most is A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor by Hank Green. I know, I am surprised. I am just as surprised as you. If you watch this channel, you might be surprised, because I would have thought a classic or some literary fiction would have been something that vies for my favorite book of the year. And again, I don't know that I could say absolutely this is my favorite book, but it really stands out as one of the best things that I read and my most memorable and most enjoyable. And this is a sci-fi novel, takes place in contemporary world, and is arguably YA. I don't think it is, but it's generally classified and seen as YA. And I don't read sci-fi or YA or many things set in our contemporary world. And so super weird that this one struck me so much. But what I love about this book is the ideas that the author is playing with. I think that they are not only so important, but they're very well executed, both in the way that he actually articulates it in rhetoric inside the book, but also reflected in the plot. And I think that is just really, really well accomplished. This is a sequel in a duology called The Carls, and the first book, I don't have it with me, but I have the whatever this is, The Dust Jacket, An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, is the first book. And I can't tell you a lot of the plot in this book without giving the first one away, but what I will say is this is somewhat like passive or seemingly passive first contact story about a girl who finds a robot-esque thing that she thinks is an art installation, and she makes a video of it on YouTube, and she is propelled into fame because actually this is an unexplainable thing that has just appeared. It appears to defy science. It is not terrestrial. We don't know where this came from, but April May, this girl becomes famous and begins sort of claiming a position as speaking on behalf of like positivity for humanity, that we don't need to feel threatened by this, that there is that there's nothing productive that's going to come out of fear. And yet what this really demonstrates is like the complexity and the dark side of fame that comes from surrendering your identity, allowing yourself to be dehumanized in favor of a brand, even if it is for a good cause. And it's also very much about internet culture and the way that fear is the bait that is preyed on to radicalize, the way that sort of pundits and attention monetization allows for the radicalization of ideas in an internet culture. Those are ideas I love and I find so interesting, and not only really intellectually stimulating to talk about, but so important in like the shifting reality that our internet world is creating for us, because our online spaces are invading our physical spaces so much. So that's really, all of that kind of applies to both books, sort of the series as a whole, what I just spoke to. None of that is really plot of what happens in this book, because I can't really go into that. But this book just takes those same ideas and takes them even farther and articulates them even more concisely and elegantly, and is reflected really in the plot. Some of these, I guess, dangers and warnings that the author certainly has for our new sort of internet world. But also, I think he speaks a lot to the need for regulation, not necessarily telling us how we need to solve these things, but regulation, the susceptibility of radicalization, the sort of fracturing and pressure put on identity as individuals and as a culture because of this sort of exponential growth of information that is threatening the stories we tell ourselves, our traditional conception of identity as humanity and as individuals. This is just so interesting to me, and I really, really appreciate the way that the author is playing with these ideas. Hank Green he's sort of an, I don't know, for lack of a better word, internet personality for a really long time. He has a YouTube channel. I enjoy following him on TikTok. That's my favorite place. He is well loved on TikTok. But he has so many other, whether it's YouTube or Twitter or TikTok or podcasts, other places where he's speaking about these ideas as well. And he's really qualified to speak of them just from experience, having been like a YouTuber for like 12 years or something like that. I think that he is both really on point with ideas, but also the plot of this book is just really, really enjoyable. Which is where I will also say, like, there's so many ideas in here. This is my second time rereading this. I'm currently reading this book for a second time and very complexly analyzing it. Oh gosh, I don't know if you can really see it, but there's really quite a lot of annotation that I'm doing. And the reason for that is because I am actually writing my Master's of Literature thesis on this duology. Really surprised me, wasn't what I was planning to do, but I couldn't stop thinking about this book to the point where I felt like it would be really, really fun to write more about it. So yeah, I have some thoughts on this, and that will translate into 30,000 words within, the next 8 months or so. So I will probably at a future date have a lot more thoughts on this book that I can talk about more in depth. But for now, I can just leave it at the fact it was one of the best books that I read last year, and it will probably be one of the best books that I read this year. It might not be for everybody, but it was really on point with a lot of the ideas that are most interesting to me right now and in the forefront of my mind, and I think in the forefront of a lot of minds. Like, let's leave it there. I hope you guys are all well, and I would love for you to like drop down below what your favorite books from 2020 were. I would love to know, and recommend things to me if you'd like to. If you also make videos, then let me know that so I can go and watch your favorites of 2020 videos. For this year, reading was one of the best parts of my year, one of the best things I had in my life this year that was really unreliable in a lot of ways. And so I hope that your reading in 2020 was what you needed it to be for you, whether that was escapism, whether that was educational, whatever it was. I hope it was great for you as well. Thanks so much for watching, for all of you that tune in and consistently watch and comment. It really means a lot to me. I like having friends in the comments, so thank you for that. I hope you're all well, and I'll see you in another video. Bye!